Welcome to everyone to our event on the Abrahamic Accords and the crises in the Middle East, legal and political aspects. We have two really terrific people to address this very timely issue this afternoon. And I will immediately introduce them. First, I want to say, as I think most of us know, that this very important diplomatic and political geostrategic transformation in the area has been in the making for a few years. In November 2015, Israel declared that it will open its diplomatic office in the UAE. On August 13, this summer, August 13, 2020, the UAE, Israel, and under the auspices of President of the United States, Donald Trump, made the joint statement declaring that the agreement would be concluded, and it was signed in the White House on September 15th with Bahrain joining the UAE, and later also Sudan joining with a number of normalization agreements. Commentators have observed this change, calling it a paradigm shift in the Middle East. But I think many of us are still kind of waiting to understand what is the new paradigm that will emerge. Clearly, it has close relationship not only with long-term trade and security cooperation between Israel and the UAE, but also with at least two other important players, namely the Palestinians and Iran. With the Palestinians, initially, this was couched in terms of preventing the planned annexation that was declared by the Netanyahu government. And with Iran, we also understand that UAE and Israel have close interests, close relations. Today, we're here to explore all these aspects a little bit more. We'll start with the legal aspects, more legal aspects for our legal audience, and we'll then move also to discuss politics. We have with us, for that purpose, Naomi Elimelech-Shamra, who is the head of the treaties department in the Israeli Foreign Ministry. She has first and second degrees from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She is now working on her doctorate degree at the Hebrew University and has background not only in international law and foreign relations, but also previously, a number of years ago, in criminal law. After that, Sinijlawi Abdelrazzak will be speaking to us. This is not the first time that we have the honor of hosting you here, Samer. Samer is a Palestinian businessman and politician residing in East Jerusalem. He has very significant ties in the UAE, and he will be able to speak from a Palestinian perspective on these developments, giving us some, I think, idea of what is going to unfold in the area resulting from these agreements. I'm very excited about this event, and I want to thank you both very, very heartily for participating with us today. So I want to start with you, Naomi, and my first question to you is just if you are able to give us some background on the legal negotiations with the UAE and perhaps with Bahrain, how they developed over the past months, perhaps some background on whether the coronavirus had any relationship with this, and please address, if you can, your role as, I believe, the lead lawyer who has been participating in the drafting of these agreements.
Thank you. I'm happy to share with you the experience from the recent period since the beginning of the negotiations with the Gulf. Actually, we had a kind of relations before with the Gulf states, with the EU. There were two aspects to the formalization process of the relations with the UAE. there was the declarative aspect. Up until now, the relations between the two states were quite discreet, and now the intention is to bring these relations to the light and reveal that there is real warm cooperation. At the beginning, when we started to work on the Treaty of Peace, it wasn't so, it was, as the Prime Minister office, they were more the dominant part of this. But then the more they decided to start with the negotiation, so we were inside this very hard. It was really difficult because our legal advisor and me, we were the only people that knew about it in our ministry, because it was, we wanted this so much to succeed, and it was very sensitive at the beginning. So there's the declarative aspect, as I said, but then it was really good cooperations with the UAE. The first thing we wanted to establish full diplomatic relations, opening embassies in both states, establishing irregular flights, and so that's why we started to do negotiations with all kinds of, after the peace treaty, we started to negotiate with all kinds of agreement. It was transportation and space and technology, innovation, economic, all kinds of agreement. And that is the part of the substantive aspect. The agreement is explicitly defined common objects and goals, which this cooperation is accepted to promote and to ensuring a sustainable peace between the states, and developing and strengthening the economies. That's the most important for the both sides, was that it will be a real relations between the states. And as we saw that there was also from the other side, we saw that they wanted to have much more agreement from all kinds of aspects. So also there was cooperation. You asked about the coronavirus. There's also cooperation in many kinds of things. It was also started with the it was medicine agreement, and also others kind of agreement, such as aviation agreement, and technology and innovations from all kinds. And there is the framework agreements that we used to do with all the countries, and also we did it with the UAE. That was the first thing. We saw that the negotiation was very very serious from the other side. They wanted to sign the more agreements, and at the beginning they wanted to do the investment agreement that usually takes like about 2 years, and here we did it in 2 weeks, and also the double taxation agreement that we are working on now, and aviation agreement and the visa agreement that now the Israeli people can, and also the Emirates, they can come to Israel. So it was really in a rapid time we did all this, and it was amazing because it was amazing how they wanted to be cooperative with us, and how they are very close to us in the way they negotiate, and they were very warm and friendly. And it was really, we were all excited from this because it was everything so serious, and we just conclude so many drafts so quickly. So I can say that, and every week we have a new agreement that we sign on. So I see it as a very warm relations.
Okay. I have to say that from the perspective of an onlooker that is not an insider in any way, it looked indeed very, very quick. And it looked like the speed also involved the fact that some of it was already, formalizing, as you said, things that were already in place before. But also looking at the language of the agreement itself, like perhaps parts of what was agreed are not in this particular agreement, that there are other agreements that will be concluded, as you say. And so I guess my question is, in terms of the text of the agreement that we have seen, which I may put here in the chat box in a second, what was included and what was not included, and why were these decisions made in the way that they were indeed made?
The structures includes the foundation, which is the peace treaty, and upon it the framework, which is now being built for, as I see it, as cooperation in all aspects. As I said before, it's economic and other. There is a significant potential for the development of these topics in the future. It's similar to any relation with the beginning in foundation. We did it also with Jordan and Egypt. To my knowledge, there is no intention to postpone any subject for a future discussion. And you can see that the peace treaty, we have the Article 5 in the peace treaty, and I can read it to you. It says the party should conclude bilateral agreements in the following spheres: an earliest practicable date, as well as in other spheres of mutual interest as may be agreed. And you can see that there is a financial investment, civil aviation, and etc. all the issues. So of course it takes time, but we have the foundation, and now we just build, and we have negotiations of all kinds of agreements now. Hopefully, as it is written in the peace agreement, earliest practicable date. This is our priority now, to conclude as more agreement as we can.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And can you comment in any way on what was the reason for this very quick shift from a kind of behind the scenes approach to treaty making, more public facing approach on maybe their side?
I can say that because when the most important things at the beginning of relations between states is the most practical things. So, okay, behind the scene, it was all the peace treaty, but then now it's, we want to light it and that everyone will see that it's good relations, and we want to work on it very hard. So it will be easier. It will be easier for both states to, also we want to prosperity and to have a good relation, and to that the economy will be good, and that tourists will travel to each state, and that it will be more investment and more. So now it's not discreet. Now everyone can see it, and it's a warm relation. That's why I think it's the difference. At the beginning, a little bit suspicious in the beginning, but then we realize that they are very warm people, very want to cooperate. They are very excited from this peace. As you can see it also in the media. They are very, very excited, and for me, it's amazing that 3-4 months ago, I couldn't speak to any of them, and now I can say that I just can I have their mobile phone, and I contact them all the time, all my colleagues, and it seems that now it's very warm relations, and everyone wants to do. I think it's even too much quickly, or too much. We need to take it a little bit more easy, because it's huge agreement, and usually it takes time to learn the other legal system, and we feel that everyone wants to do it as soon as possible. So that's it.
By the way, I in the conversation preparing for this public conversation, I asked you about this aspect which I find interesting. I'm reading from the preamble of the agreement, which explains why these are called the Abrahamic or Abraham Accords. It says, recognizing that the Arab and Jewish peoples are descendants of a common ancestor, Abraham, and inspired in that spirit to foster in the Middle East a reality in which Muslims, Jews, Christians, and peoples of all faiths, denominations, beliefs, and nationalities live in and are committed to a spirit of coexistence, mutual understanding, and mutual respect. My question, I guess, who came up with this formulation, this kind of narrative coming from culture, coming from history or religion? Was it the UAE partner? Was it an Israeli official, or was it an American idea?
Yeah, well, many claim credit for this idea. The concept of religious coexistence is something that the Emirates have been promoting for a long time ago, and it is very significant for Israel as well. The paragraph in the Accords in which mentions that all the descendants of Abraham was brought up actually by Dr. Tal Becker, our legal advisor. And he developed this with the American. And it's expressed and emphasized the importance of the agreement with an Arab state which recognized the right of existence of the state of Israel, and that we have all mutual destiny, and we have all mutual history. And actually, we can see what is really unifies us, and things that are common. And I think it's true. It's a narrative, and it's expressed exactly the common and that we have with the other side.
Okay, I don't know if you can comment about this, but you did mention it in your comments, which is the relative secrecy, even internally, that this was held in terms of negotiations and the involvement of people outside of the Prime Minister's office, basically. This was also widely reported on in the Israeli media. Why was this the case from your perspective? And was it different? Did it make your work as a lawyer different from other experience in the past?
Well, this is usually when it's about peace and new relations with a new state. So it's something that it's a matter of policy. And here it's the Prime Minister, he leads this a long time ago. It's not, it's very known that there were kind of relations with the Emirates before. As I said before, it wasn't, it was discreet, but it's something that our Prime Minister wanted to lead, and he wanted this to be from the Prime Minister office. So it was different, but as you know, we don't have so many peace agreements, unfortunately. But the Prime Minister and participate us too with this. Our legal advisor and I'm as the director of the treaties department, and we knew this about from the beginning when they started to negotiate. And we had meetings about this agreement, and there were a few drafts around, and it was amazing that all kind of draft that I saw, we had the American draft and our legal advisor draft, and it says almost the same thing. We work on few drafts, but eventually it was the American draft with our comments on it. And I can say that we were a part of it. It was different, but it's a peace treaty, and it's very obvious why it was different than other negotiations.
Okay. I guess another issue that is very important in this particular context is, of course, the Palestinian question in the treaty. And with regard to this, there were conflicting messages that we heard in the media. Initially, it was said that Israel made a commitment not to annex the West Bank in the context of this agreement. Then the text does not reflect that. The text reflects a rather more fuzzy, if I may, commitment to peace, prosperity, and regional stability. To what degree, from your perspective as the Foreign Office, does this treaty bear at all on obligations towards the Palestinians?
Okay, the accords, both with the UAE and with Bahrain, are actually bilateral agreements, which are intended to address the bilateral relations between the parties. But however, it was agreed that the parties should not ignore the elephant in the room, as I say. And since the conflict with the Palestinians obviously influences the entire situation in the Middle East and the relations of Israel with different Arab states, the accords express the general principle according to which no states would be hostage to disputes of other states with the third parties. The accords, as you mentioned, you can see it that there is you can see they refer to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It includes reference to the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But as I see it, it's just a little bit different from what we usually expect. I can say that the paradigm is now different because now, if we used to say that the peace treaty symbolizes a change in the perception of the issue of peace in the Middle East, until the peace treaty, the paradigm was that in order to achieve peace in the Middle East, peace must be established between Israel and the Palestinians. And only then the peace will be achieved between other countries. The peace treaty shows a different approach now. It is possible that creating peace first with different countries in the Middle East will lead to a dialogue. I hope so. It can lead to a dialogue of peace with the Palestinians. And I can see it also with the joint communique with Bahrain and also with the peace treaty with the Emirates, that there is references, few references to the peace to solve the conflict with the Palestinian people. So it's actually it's a positive, I think, way, because maybe the atmosphere of peace in the Middle East will lead to start to renegotiate with the Palestinians, as I can see it.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, I want to pass to Samer. And before I do so, I want to tell everyone in this online room that I will be looking at the chat box. I will also be looking at the raise hand function. And after Samer concludes his remarks, we'll be taking questions from the audience and hoping to generate some conversation, some discussion here. And Samer, thanks again for being with us today. The first question that I have to you is, what involvement, if any, did the Palestinians have in this process, and if and why did it seem like they were not involved? And also, I would like you to address what are the interests that the Palestinians may or may not have in this normalization process that we have seen between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Bahrain.
Well, thank you very much for hosting me, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Well, I think we have been all involved in the Abrahamic Accords. Every single country, every single organization in the Middle East, because the way I see the Abraham Accords and the way the best it is understood, it's a reflection of realities in the Middle East rather than a mechanism to change realities in the Middle East. And I can explain this as follows. I think the major event of what was called as the Arab Spring that started some years ago was a turning point development in the Middle East. It highlighted some important facts that has been read by the Gulf countries in particular in a way that pushed them towards changing strategies in the Middle East. And these facts are as follows. It was clear that there are three main regional powers affecting the Middle East. All of them are non-Arab, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. It was clear for the Arabs in general and for the Gulf countries in particular that the world only respects and takes serious only those countries who are affecting and have the ability to affect the region, whether in a negative or a positive way. Then the Arab Spring itself demonstrated that the West was supporting, or even the USA in particular, was supporting the political Islam axis against the moderate Arab regions, against the moderate Arab countries in the region. They have given a green light to help sometimes to destroy countries like Libya or to flip governments like in Egypt. It reached so close to the Gulf. It was in the neighborhood in Yemen. It even disturbed Bahrain. So the threat was so close to the Arab countries and to the Gulf. This made the Gulf countries starting seeing that the main threat comes from Iran, from Turkey, not necessarily from Israel. They started seeing Israel as a potential partner rather than a source of threat. So the priorities have changed in the region. We should understand this background. How have we been involved as Palestinians into this? It's simple. I think the Arab world has pledged itself to the Palestinian leadership, providing her with the exclusivity to handle the Israeli-Arab conflict for the past 50 years. They gave the current PA leadership exclusivity of negotiations of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it was noticed that there has not been any progress into this. And the Arab countries, the Gulf countries in particular, did not understand why the Palestinians can meet the Israelis at the levels of the prime minister to the most junior officer in the army, have trade with Israel, employ themselves as subcontracting, security subcontractor, while this is not allowed to the Arab countries. And in a way, I can understand that United Arab Emirates is not only another rich Gulf country. The United Arab Emirates, they have the desire to lead. They have been the best in economy, in tourism, in all aspects of life. So they felt the necessary to take the lead in the Middle East. And all these backgrounds or these facts have paved the way for the Abrahamic Accords. I think that the Arab countries also came to the conclusion, and it was proved from the negative reaction of Israel to the Arab Peace Initiative since 2002, that normalization was not a sufficient incentive for Israel to be willing to pay a price in the currency of Palestinian rights and freedoms. So maybe changing the rules, trying to be engaged with Israel, and through these engagements, try to push and lead the way to have a breakthrough on the Palestinian level. For me, I think we should not focus on the why did it happen, and we should not focus on the text of the Abraham Accords. We should admit, first of all, as Palestinians, that we did not manage our relations with the Arab world in the best way under the leadership of the current PA leadership with President Abbas. We have distanced ourselves from the Arabs. We did not build a sense of partnership on the political level. And we pushed them to start thinking about ways or other ways to be able to be more influential in the region. The reaction of the Palestinian leadership towards the Abraham Accord was negative, was not correct. It lacked diplomacy. It did not have any political wisdom. And this has isolated us more and more into the corner. What we do now is to try to focus more on the politics ahead as a result of these accords.
Before we go to the politics ahead, if I may, I just want to clarify one point. With the accords, we saw Palestinians going to the streets really protesting against the normalization process, and the narrative that we have read was one of the complete abandonment on the international level of the Palestinian people. On the other hand, we heard from UAE, people speaking on behalf of the UAE, that this was actually very important because it prevented the annexation. And so these are two very, very different narratives. If you will, I would like to ask you specifically which of these narratives is closer to reality.
Well, these accords were based on the myth that Israel dropped annexation. But Israel never stopped its settlement expansion on the ground. And I think this could be a legitimate comment on these accords. If we have been more involved with the Emiratis during the preparation for the accords, we could have helped to get a better price for these accords, at least a more serious commitment on stopping settlement, not stopping annexation, because annexation has happened long ago. It's meaningless whether Israel will declare it or not. The action has been taken on the ground. The whole West Bank has been annexed in practice. If you see the number of settlements, now we are talking about 240 settlements in the West Bank, around 700,000 settlers in West Bank and East Jerusalem. In addition to the industrial zones, the highways, the tunnels, the infrastructure, it's massive, costly infrastructure that has been invested in the West Bank. And I don't think that anybody can unscramble this political or demographical omelet. Nobody can have a solution of separating the West Bank from Israel. I have a lot of doubts, serious doubts about the two-state solution. But I would believe that, well, let's give it a chance. There are still a generation of leadership on the Palestinian side. They believe they can achieve it. The international community still have, they have invested a lot of diplomacy and a lot of investment in the two-state solution, and they still believe they have a chance. Let them try. They have Biden now. I'm not sure what kind of change in the Israeli leadership will happen after the split of the Likud, if it is a real split or not, if there will be election or not. But if another change in power happens in Israel, and then if we can have our elections and have a more young leadership, maybe, I don't know, maybe some magic, some miracle will happen and the two-state solution will be rescued. But I think the annexation was not a good price for the accords. I don't think Israel respected this commitment. They are using the remaining days of Trump to announce each day about a new tender, a new approval of housing plans. I think even they have started putting a plan of the days after Trump, how they are going to enforce more the settlement in the West Bank. They will focus on infrastructure because nobody can challenge. Maybe Biden will be able to stop more housing units, but he will not be able to stop roads, highways, tunnels, and these infrastructure projects. They will boost settlement. They will help settlement. They will make it more easy. So I think I'm not convinced that this was serious. I also feel that we are to blame ourselves for not being on the stage.
Let me ask you then, precisely from that perspective, before I open to questions from the audience here, you suggested in your previous set of comments that maybe if Palestinian policy would change, the process with the UAE could actually become some kind of opportunity. I think you suggested that. I may have been misunderstanding you, but I think that's what I heard. And I would like to give you an opportunity to ask you how exactly policy should change in order for Palestinians, in your view, to be able to use this as a positive opportunity to advance their own interests in the area?
Well, first of all, I think that UAE is a sovereign state. It has the right to sign agreements with Israel and with any other country. We as Palestinians, we need to respect this. We need to see it as a positive step because despite the fact that in previous experiences where Israel signed peace accords with Jordan and Egypt, this did not really help a lot the Palestinian cause, but I think in this case it's different because United Arab Emirates is a different country. United Arab Emirates is a country that does not receive financial aid from USA, not like Jordan or Egypt that they are very dependent on the around 1.5 billion USD yearly from USA each. United Arab Emirates is a very strong country. Comparing the economics of UAE to Israel, UAE has $1 trillion USD economy. Israel is 400 billion, so they are 2 times more stronger in economy. UAE is even in military a strong country. They rank 14 in military expenditure with 23 billion a year, while Israel rank 16 with 19 billion a year. In a way or another, there is a balance in relation between United Arab Emirates and Israel. There is a real sense of partnership between both countries. And I think the chemistry on the level of the people to people was also positive. So this, taking into consideration also that the Emiratis have won the hearts of the Americans in Washington, D.C. Everybody loves UAE now in D.C. and Tel Aviv. So for us as a Palestinian, having such a friend that is an Arab country that was supportive to the Palestinian cause, that up till now, Emirate is confirming that it is supporting the Palestinian state on the lands of 67 with East Jerusalem as the capital. It's voting in the UN. It shows we have a good friend, a friend that has a perfect relation with the Israelis and with the Americans. If we get engaged with this friend, if we get more, again, engaged with the Americans and with the Israelis in a better way, I think we could have some positive results in the future. But I have doubts that the current leadership is capable to do so. The current leadership has been leading the Palestinian people for the last 60 years. Abu Mazen has been there in the 60s when they established the PLO and Fatah. This old school of leadership, I think they have done whatever they can do. I am sure that even to Israel, Abbas has done what even Mandela will not do to his oppressors with the security coordination. He has done a perfect job. He has contributed in saving a lot of Israeli lives. And yet he's not receiving any credit into this. He receives blames from the Israeli side. I have a lot of reason to criticize him because he has failed to build a democracy. He has failed to protect freedoms in our society. He has failed to respect democracy. The last time we have done elections was 16 years old, 16 years away. So internally, I have a lot of reasons to criticize this leadership, but I don't see why the Israelis are criticizing him with all the efforts he has been putting into the security coordination. I think, regardless the different opinion inside the Palestinian side, this Abraham Accords is an opportunity for Palestinians. We should engage positively. We should see the windows that it's opening for us and try to play the right cards.
Thank you so much, Tamer. Okay, so that was very good. I think two different perspectives, both in terms of where you come from, obviously, but also the background that you bring to the table. We have a couple of people who already indicated that they would like to comment. I also want to encourage anyone who's here, students, people from outside the Minerva Center, to come into this conversation. This is intended to be as open as possible. And I would like to hear, personally would also like to hear new voices. But the first commentator is someone who's been around for much longer than myself. Amnon, would be lovely to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Itamar, for organizing this. And thank you very much, Naomi and Sama, for interesting presentations on the making of this accord on the one hand, and on the significance on those who did not participate in the making of this accord on the other hand. I'd like to make very briefly, 5 points that I think call for some sort of appreciation both from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And the first one is, actually it goes to your framing, Itamar. You began your framing in 2015, and I wonder whether a previous event that we organized shouldn't have been the starting point, and these are the Oslo Accords. So I think the entire arc stems from the Oslo Accord. It was actually the Oslo Accord that enabled the kind of dealings with the Gulf countries that were kept discreet. They were kept in the closet for reasons that Naomi has alluded to, but they emerged from the Oslo Accords, and Peres, as we all know, has been there, visited there. So I think it's an arc that should be perceived that way historically. Now, drawing from that, it's interesting to note that what has shifted is actually the relationship within the Gulf countries. So after Oslo Accord, it was Qatar that was more, showed greater interest in perhaps, this is where Peres visited, and now because of internal conflicts within the Gulf, we tend to view the Gulf states as, oh, it's the same thing. No, there are some disagreements within the Gulf states where Qatar plays one role, and then there is a dispute between the Emirates and Bahrain and, on the one hand, and Qatar on the other hand. And this is a shift that has been made relatively recently. That ties into what Samer was pointed to with respect to the Arab Spring, the new axis of Iran, Turkey versus Egypt, Saudi. That is playing part of it. So that was point number 2, the new alignment. Point number 3 relates to point number 2 in terms of the geopolitics. We are shifting, and I think that the Gulf countries, especially the Emirates, have realized that. We're shifting or we're in the midst of shifting from geopolitics of oil to geopolitics of information and data analysis. And if you look into the future, you realize that if the economy generates a lot of value out of oil, that is not necessarily sustainable. But whereas if your economy generates high-tech related goods, then that's a good thing. And this shifts the geopolitical standing of Israel. And I think this is part of the reason why some Arab countries say, you know what, we have to solve these Palestinian questions sooner rather than later, because if we don't, it becomes an obstacle for us. It's not just that we want to take leadership because we have nothing better to do. We want to get this off the table so we can pursue our own interests, which is to generate this new economy of information where we can also take a leadership, and Israel has some advantage in that. So that's point number 3. There is another dimension here, and this will be point number 4 very quickly. I think the United Emirates have realized something quite profound, that if you want to tell Israelis, look, Palestinians first, Palestinians first, Palestinians first, and it doesn't happen, then maybe reverse strategic approach would work. And this is give the Israelis something, and then they will feel they have something to lose if you then later on withdraw it because there's no progress with the Palestinians. So why don't you give Israelis a taste of peace with the Gulf countries and see what it's like, and then say, you like this? Okay, now that you like this, if you want to continue, or if you don't behave towards the Palestinians, we can withdraw this. Would be more effective than saying, no soup for you, no soup for you. Why is that important? Because Israelis have tried peace with Egypt and peace with Jordan. Now, peace with Egypt was very important from a security perspective, and so is peace with Jordan. But we didn't see as people the fruits of the peace, so to speak. So the idea here is to generate some incentives this way, have something to lose. I think that's the point. Now the last point I want to make here has to do with legacy, and that's personal politics. Trump has been mentioned, the notion of the Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu also. There is this notion of how to achieve legacy here, and I think that's part of the mechanics. It also deals not just with making legacy on a personal politics level. It also has to do. It has inside this. There's also an element of what is this two-state solution about, and Summer talked about it, and I think Naomi alluded to that. The idea now is that no leader, so Abbas would not sign away the Palestinian state, and Bibi will not, Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister, will not sign into this personal politics, but also ideology. But I think the idea of what does it mean to have a state, a Palestinian state, is now in flux. Is it a state, a Westphalian state, as we thought about traditionally, or as under the partition decision of 1947? Is this the kind of state we're talking about, or are we talking about a new form of state which will have these powers but not those powers, and there will be a regional agreement with respect to those types of issues, and another agreement with respect to these type of issues? So it's the legacy is not just personal legacy; it's the legacy of how do we think about states now in the Middle East and altogether. So I think those 5 points all reflect to how we should consider or think about the Abraham Accords.
Excellent, Amnon. Thank you. I want to get your response on this. Perhaps I think if I will just summarize very quickly. For Summer, the carrots approach that Amnon outlined. Do you believe in the carrots approach? Do you believe that normalization can lead the way to political liberation? I put it very starkly, intentionally, of course.
Well, I think, yes, it could work. I do trust that the Emiratis are not short-sighted. I do trust they have a vision. I do trust they are planning to have a leading role in the Middle East. And, real peace is done between Israelis and Palestinians. Having this problem unfixed will keep affecting everything in the region. Nobody can claim that peace will be dominant in the Middle East, even if Israel signs a treaty every day with a new Arab capital, even if Israel raises the Israeli flag on every building in the Arab world. If Israel does not find a proper solution with the millions of Palestinians facing the Israelis every day, peace will not be reached. I think what's happening now could help. And I don't like to keep using the term peace because, the peace process since Accord was only a process with no peace. The settlement was continuing, the occupation was continuing, the brutality of the occupation was there. So it was a process, but not peace inside this process. I think we should start talking about values, principles, rights. I mean, peace is a very big word. We should a little bit identify it. We should change strategies. Whatever countries like United Emirates can do, if the change does not happen inside the Palestinian and Israeli society, it will be a very difficult task. We should start by regaining trust. We should look at the help of the Emirates and the Gulf countries to create more confidence and create a more suitable atmosphere. But we should start internally from our societies, the Palestinians and Israelis. We need a change in both societies. We need a change in both leaderships. We need to produce leaders who are capable and able to achieve some results. And I don't think we have a lot of time. I think we have ending the Palestinian suffer is very urgent task because it has been waiting for a century, and the people are fed up. You cannot convince me to wait more. To wait more for what? It's there is no complicity in this situation. Mm-hmm. The Israelis need to decide whether to respect a collective right of the Palestinians and give them a state, or to respect individual rights and give them the voting right. We cannot continue in path.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the question, how does this agreement relate to the one-state, two-state debate that we also had here in Minerva previously, also with a good contribution from you, is a very, very fascinating one. I have my own thoughts about the subject, but I want to move to another question that came from the audience anonymously. The anonymous questioner wants me to address Naomi, if you will, and ask the question. Now, I don't know if the factual premise underlying this question is correct or not, so you need to correct me if this is wrong, but why have there been no Arabs or Palestinian citizens of Israel in official Israeli delegations to the Gulf? And also, the person who asked this says, once again, I'm not sure whether this is true or not, no business people that are Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel are involved in investments in the Gulf. If you have anything to say about that. The same person also asked you, Samer, if you can give your Palestinian perspective on the power play that Iran is engaging in the region, and what is your Palestinian perspective on the nuclear threat that Iran may very well become. So I'll start with Naomi, if you have something to say to this question.
I can say that there is opportunity to everyone to invest and to have cooperation with the other side, with the Emirates. And business people from Israel, you can see that also in the media, that they travel and they are doing business there. And actually every Israeli can do business there. Actually, some of them did before, if they have double citizenship before. But now, of course, they have more opportunities and more incentives to develop the business area. And the second question, why is as I see, I don't know why. Actually, the negotiations with that we had with the Emirates, it was people from the ministries, all the ministries. So it depends who works with the ministries. It was G2G negotiations. It wasn't B2B. I believe now they started more business to business and people to people, more than government to government. It will be more on the private sector.
I think that the particular angle here is, why are Arabs not involved in the official delegations, if that is indeed the case?
Yeah, well, it depends on who works in the ministries, because in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs we do have involved of the Arab population. It depends who works in the ministry. So of course it's good that there will be more participants in the future. I hope it will be more, but it depends who works in the ministry. And I can tell you that in the negotiations in the investment agreement, there was the one that led this. It was an Arab Israeli. So it depends who works in the ministry.
All right, thank you. And Samar, do you have anything to say about the Iranian power play in the region and the nuclear threat?
Well, definitely Iran is a threat to the whole region. It's a threat to us as Palestinians. We, the Palestinians, we are part of the Sunni Arab world. We are part of the Axis anti-Iran in the region, led by Saudi Arabia and United Emirates. We are part of this, a genuine part of this. We are aligning ourselves to the formal position of this coalition, and we are part of it. So we do feel the threat, and we do understand this threat, and we are ready to cooperate to the maximum possible because it will affect us. No doubts in this. Any disturbance in the Gulf countries, in the Arab countries, is a disaster for us and for everybody. So we are very clear on this.
Okay. Now, I think we have some comments by Professor Daniel Benoliel, my colleague, who is joining us today from the UK, perhaps from Oxford.
Hi, and thank you very much for this wonderful event. I have some concern I'd like to raise here and see if the speakers would like to relate to it, which is a concern regarding a possible conflict of law between Bahrain and the UAE's stand and the Arab League's concrete commitments within the formula of land for peace. One reference would be, or important, decisive reference would be the 2002 declaration by the Arab League summit in Beirut regarding the concrete commitments to a list of topics that fall within the parameters of land for peace, refugees, vis-a-vis the United Nations Resolution 194, holy places, and so forth, which are perceived to be a part of a regional commitment internationally recognized by the Arab world through the Arab League, including Bahrain and the UAE, therefore abiding towards these two countries, at least as I understand it. Whereas the agreements with Bahrain and the UAE, just to remind, do not contain any reference to UN resolutions regarding the Middle East peace process, neither do they mention within that the 242 Security Council resolution or the 338 resolution of 1973. They, of course, do not make any reference to the 1978 Camp David Agreement or the 1993 5 Oslo agreements, which, just to compare, Jordan made throughout. And so there is a certain aspect which Israelis are less concerned about, but then the Bahrainians and the UAEs could find themselves entangled into, and that is the relative difficulty left on the table with the commitment which is regional and abiding possibly towards a commitment that is regional and is the one I mentioned. So if you would want to refer to this possible conflict of law, I'll be happy.
This is one of those questions that really would make it much more wonderful if we had a UAE and or Bahrainian representative around the table. However, maybe Naomi would like to comment on this. I'm not sure.
I think it's true that if we had an Amorite representative here now, it will be easier. But well, the future we will see. Of course, there will be some. In the near future, we will see the country of law, that it will be interesting to see how they will resolve this conflict that they will have So it will be interesting to see it because I know that they have commitments to us, but also to the Arab League. So we will have to see how it will be and how it will be developed, the peace around all this international law also. Of course, it will be different from other states. Of course, we will see some sensitive issues and some way that they will try to overcome some contradictions from their commitments to us, to the Arab Leagues, and to the international law in some aspects. But we will see the future, how it will go. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I have another question from the floor here that I think is directed to you, Naomi, which is, what do you think the chances are for a normalization agreement with the Saudi Arabians?
We are also listening in the media, and we hope it will come. As we know, I heard from the media as you that it's not going to be so in the near future, but we also hope that it will be. And I'm sure that the peace agreement with Bahrain and Emirates will elaborate the opportunity and that it will come in the near future.
Okay, and another question that I received from the audience is with regard to the F-35 agreement. I guess if you had any involvement in that aspect, if you can share how it developed and how it became finally public, what were the interests involved and so forth?
Well, actually, during the negotiation, we didn't hear about it. We didn't know about it, only from the media later, and all the conversation that we heard about it later, and all the protest about it. But it's from the media later. It wasn't It wasn't on the table, on the negotiation table. We didn't know about it.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to give Ido Rosenzweig of the Minerva Center the opportunity also to ask a question. Ido, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. My question is actually for Naomi. You talked a lot about the warm relations that we now have with the Emirates, and there was a point in Summer's, I think, last sentences that talked about UN resolutions and the UN in general, and there is a very clear Arab League-oriented majority against Israel in the UN in votes, especially in the UN. We see it in the Human Rights Council, and I wonder, do you think that this process of warm relations with in accordance to the Abraham Accords and other normalizations agreements that are going on in the region could lead to a change in that aspect, that we can actually see in the near future rather than in the later on, some changes in the voting pattern in the UN and especially in the Human Rights Council?
Well, I hope it will be, but as you can see that we can see that in many states that we have a very warm relations. We can see that they are against us in the UN resolutions. If you remember when Modi from the Prime Minister of India, that he visited Israel, and it was so warm relations with our Prime Minister, and a week after he was against us in the UN resolution. So Israel get used to that it sometimes, even if we have a warm relations, the resolutions in the United Nations are against Israel. So it's something that we know that happens, and we know that in many states that we have a strong relations, we still trying to do the best that they will be, that they will support us in the UN resolution. But unfortunately, it's a very hard place for us, the UN. We hope that they will be in one day UN resolution from other states that will support Israel, and also, of course, for the Emirates and Bahrain. But it's not that we have the illusion that it will be so in the nearer future. We know it will take time, as I said before, in a very good relation with other states, and that we know that there is a very good cooperations for a long time. We still have UN resolutions against us.
There is another question from the audience that I received now, also for you, Naomi, which is from the security perspective, what are the opportunities that this agreement creates for Israel? And what are the Israeli expectations in terms of security collaboration with the UAE?
And generally, we want to cooperate with all kinds of spheres, but on security, as I don't know exactly what kind of a cooperation will be in the future. Up until now, there is no agreement on that issue. Maybe in the future, we will start negotiations in some areas. I know there is a negotiation on space and innovations issues and some sort of other cooperation, such as some cyber issues, but I don't know exactly what will be the security cooperation in the future.
Okay. All right. So at this point, I have, I think, exhausted the questions from the audience, and we're almost at 3:30, which I think is a good place to end, unless you, both speakers, would like to make any concluding comments.
Well, I want to thank Summer. It was very interesting to listen to you. I agree with many things that you said. It's very interesting, your point of view. And I hope it will be in the near future that we all back to the table of negotiation.
Okay, so with that, I want to again say that this was really important. I'm happy that to see colleagues and students, and especially for the questions. And I hope we can continue this conversation as we go forward on the different foreign policy and diplomacy issues that are now changing very quickly and really transforming the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.